And to that piece of lieutenant that's always on his podcast, bashing us, him.
Right. Roll call, people.
That's right. Good morning, everybody. 8:05 live Eastern time. Of course, 5:05 in the Pacific Coast. For me, it's bright, dark. I tell you, really dark. It's bright and early. So good morning. We got a great guest on. We have Maron, who's going to give us her platform, tell us a little bit about herself, and she's running against Alvin Bragg in his re-election. So if people weren't sure, Alvin Bragg's up for re-election. Maron's going to be running as a Republican. So it's great to have you. Good morning on a Monday morning. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's start off light. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your occupation, your career, and how you got into politics.
Sure. Well, Eric and John, first of all, thanks for having me on. It took us a little while to schedule. I'm super happy to be here at long last. And I think we picked the perfect time to have the show because we're in the middle of these Democratic primary debates. And, you know, I'm going to answer your question about my, like, who I was, how I got here. But like a big part of it is because, you know, I used to be a Democrat. I was a Democrat for over 30 years. And being a common sense Democrat these days, being a Democrat who has long been against defunding the police and lots of other stupid ideas, you know, basically got me wedged out of the Democratic Party. I mean, I left and I hung out in Independentville for a while, which was nice. But if you're going to run for office, you know, really it makes most sense usually, maybe not always, but usually makes most sense to be in one of the two major parties, right? And so here I am as a newly minted Republican running against Alvin Bragg. It should not be so hard to be a common sense Democrat in our city, but it is. I know. I tried really hard. And, you know, for folks who've never heard of me, going back before that, I was a public defender. I worked at the Legal Aid Society. For many years, worked as a trial attorney in the Bronx office and the Manhattan office. I worked as their director of training. I worked at Cardozo Law School, training third-year law students in the criminal defense clinic. I've been in and out of the criminal justice system for a long time. You know, subsequent to that, because I had a big old, the same way I broke up with the Democratic Party, I broke up with Legal Aid Society, a big old, you know, we're just not that into you anymore breakup. And we can talk more about that later. But, you know, after that, I've worked in the not-for-profit world. I've worked creating both an education advocacy not-for-profit and also, you know, working for a larger national not-for-profit, doing good work with lots of good organizations out there, trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah. So I've been a fan of you for a long time, even when you were a Democrat. I mean, I think
Thank you.
When the world turned insane in 2020, I found a lot of comfort in a lot of the things that you were saying related to the mandates, relating to children, relating to common sense public safety and not getting rid of the New York City Police Department or defunding them when literally, I mean, we're watching it now. Every mayoral candidate had the exact opposite stance of you. Right, so it's like, you know, so I found a lot of comfort in that. Could you just bring us back to that time for you? Like the mandates, the how to defund the police, like what were you seeing? You living in Manhattan? Like what were you saying?
You know, I live in lower Manhattan and I don't know. I don't know what, I'll tell you this. Lots of people agreed with me back then too, but very few people were willing to speak up and say it out loud. That's the truth, right? Plenty of people, even elected officials, even people who said the opposite, knew perfectly well that defunding the police was a disastrous idea. That, you know, if you had some basic familiarity with the history of our city, right? Like I went to college, I'm going to date myself here, guys, but I came to college in the late 80s, early 90s. And the homicide rate was about as high as it was going to get in New York City. A huge part of that it's not an asterisk per se, but it's a little different than when crime is rising now, because a huge part of that had to do with drug wars. And so it was in some ways more isolated to like parts of the city. And so other parts of the city could feel safer. But of course, it spread everywhere. The famous cases of the time were like Bernie gets on the subway, the Central Park jogger cases. Nobody is immune from rising crime that comes all over the place. I think now we see something a little different, like crime is everywhere. Every Dwayne Reed has their stuff locked up and every subway car is filthy and disgusting. But, the crime rate was really, really high in the early 90s. It was the Congressional Black Caucus that worked with Bill Clinton and that worked with, the Democrats to say, we need more cops on the street. Because guess what? When you put more cops on the street, when you trained more cops, instead of, don't get me started on the lowering the standards in our public schools, lowering entrance exams for civil service, when everything's being lowered, when you put high quality, well-trained police officers on the streets and you add more, we added 6,000 more back in the 90s, you bring crime down. I mean, you have to do other things too. You have to target smartly. And I think Jessica Tisch is doing some of that now. But at any rate, going back to then, we saw that the proactive targeted policing brought down the crime rate and made New York City safer and safer and safer. And over that, the whole time I was working at the Legal Aid Society, I was also living in New York like a regular everyday person. And you could go out at night. You could take the subway at any hour of day or night and be relatively safe. I'll give you one quick example. When my first son was born in 2006 and my in-laws are from Argentina, and they'd come up here and I'd take like the baby, push the stroller to the kids' park. And I would leave my stroller with my handbag and my phone and my camera. They weren't the same thing at the time, like all shoved in the bottom of the stroller, take out the kid, plunk him in the kiddie swing, and they'd be like, what are you doing? But, and I'd say like, no, it's safe. It's fine. You can just leave it there. But it's like, we lived in such a safe city that you would, not everywhere. It's not like it's crime free, but you could leave your stroller with your stuff in a park area and go to the other area of the park and push your kid in the swing because it was a relatively safe city. Now I'm going back to telling my kids, before you put the key in the lock, look around to see who's on the street because of push-in robbery fear, right? I had to do that in the 90s. Then I stopped doing that because it stopped being an omnipresent fear. And now you got to start doing it again. So it's like it's this pendulum swing that is so completely tied to bad policy, stupidly executed, pushed upon us by the lunatic champagne socialists that are running for mayor right now. Not that I don't have strong opinions about this, right?
Well, good morning. It's great to have you here. Maron, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking your time out. We really appreciate it. It's interesting, right? What are you talking about here? I think in the 80s, there was a war on drugs. And now, kind of a war on politics, and it's a war on common sense. It's a war on sanity. And that war is combated by an administration that wants to give this perception versus reality campaign. Right? And that's what you're talking about. Your perception is reality of how you feel out there. You felt comfortable to have an item that, right, you said you wouldn't let your guard completely down, but you felt comfortable that you could live. And it was habitable in comparison to now. So obviously with your background, right? What were your thoughts when Alvin Bragg is obviously one of those progressive DAs in the country. There are other DAs just like him, but obviously with the critique and the eyes on New York City, what were your thoughts when we talk about crime and stuff like that? Where Alvin Bragg came out with his memorandum, where he translated and interpreted how crimes would be prosecuted in the DA's office. What were your thoughts, especially with your background, with the law background, and defending perpetrators, people that are innocent until proven guilty? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, in 21, when he was running for office, I was running for office for city council downtown and city council District 1 as a Democrat, as a common sense Democrat. Was not feeling the love. I came in 4th out of like 10 or 11 people in that race. There are plenty of good common sense people downtown, but they're not all voting in the Democratic primary, which is why I think you got to expand the pool of people who can vote for you by giving common sense Democrats, independents, Republicans, anybody who wants the opportunity to vote for you in the general. But I wasn't super surprised. Look, I voted for Liz Crotty as my number one choice for Manhattan DA back in 21 because I thought she had in the Democratic primary. because I thought she had the most sensible platform. She and I were not so far apart and agreeing with each other about the importance of the district attorney needing to work hand in glove with law enforcement. It's so self-indulgent and foolish. And, Alvin Bragg, because he's our first Black DA, he's the son of Harlem, blah, blah, blah. It's like, he could totally have opted out of the silly, privileged, rich kid position of defund the police and the sort of white guilt, like, oh my God, the Black people are oppressed by the bad criminal justice. It's so dumb, right? And it's dumb because when crime rises, it rises most significantly in our low income neighborhoods. So when the homicide rate goes up, who gets hurt the first? Young Black men. Young Black men are also disproportionately the perpetuators of violence in many of those communities, but they are also the victims of violence in those communities. So instead of putting your stupid Black Lives Matter sign out, why don't you do something to protect Black lives? And proactive, good, smart policing has shown us again and again and again that it does protect Black lives, because it protects all lives and it protects the lives that are most at risk. So I just, I thought all of this 4 years ago, but it used to take me like an hour to say it because you had to be so careful about how you said all this race stuff. And I think one good thing that's come out of sort of the intensity of our political debates over the last few years is that there's enough people just fed up with the nonsense, and we want to just say it plain and say it like it is.
Speaking of fed up with the nonsense, if I'm not mistaken, you were elected to lead a community education council, and had been removed by former New York City School Chancellor Banks, who was appointed by Eric Adams. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Sure, I totally will. But you know what I realized? I just went off on my rant and I didn't totally answer your last question. Let me go back to Bragg's day one memo, and then let's talk about the school stuff, because the day one memo is outrageous, right? This is a memo where he says, oh, my first day on the job is one of the most important prosecutor's offices in the country. Let me tell you about all the crimes I'm not going to prosecute, right? Like, he's like, I don't want to prosecute Fairby, even though we know how well policing for those quality of life crimes not only cleans up our subways, but it actually helps with the administration of justice by catching, people who have open warrants and people who are going to be more menacing to passengers in ways that we currently see now. So acting, calling Fairbeat a low-level crime, we see in front of our eyes every day how that mini decision alone has been really bad for New Yorkers who rely on the public, subways. But it's not just that. He said, I'm also not going to prosecute robbery 3 as a felony. I'm not going to arrest people for petit larceny. And most horrifically, and I think really most inexcusably, I'm not going to prosecute resisting arrest, right? Like, he wants to, he would make a great legal aid lawyer, is what I can say about Alvin Bragg, right? He's really concerned in making sure that people who have committed crimes don't get prosecuted for those crimes and don't get held accountable for those crimes. I mean, that's not exactly a legal aid lawyer's job. Your job as a defense lawyer is to make sure people's constitutional rights are protected and to give them a full and complete defense. And that's an honorable job. But it's a different job than being a prosecutor. And Alvin Bragg is a little bit confused. So when you have both sides of the criminal justice system doing the same thing, it's a real problem, because then you don't have people representing the people of New York who want to take a safe and clean subway, know that they can go into a store and buy some toothpaste without having to go through a 5-step process of, calling someone over to them. And people who are, like, frankly, fed up with watching spoiled little Hamas headband wearing Antifa wannabe kids screaming in the face of young working class cops who are working our city, who are doing a hard job, right? It really, it drives me bonkers to see spoiled, young people so self-indulgent of their ideology. Everyone can have their ideology. You can have the worst idea in the world, and you have the absolute 100% right to go out and protest all of your bad, rally around your bad ideas. But to see the people that are in this, city, to see Columbia University students or anybody else screaming and yelling at cops who are the working people of this city. And we have a police department in this, it's not even majority white, so it doesn't even fit in with these spoiled, selfish narratives, about that are like 1950s Alabama narratives that these silly kids are like parading around. Really drives me crazy. But Alvin Bragg's memo was part of that silly idea and philosophy. It really came out of the idea that like the accused, people who are being accused of crimes, are somehow oppressed by systemic racism, somehow oppressed by unfair systems. And so he made a big declaration about what he wasn't going to prosecute. There's nothing that explains better why we need a different prosecutor in this city than the fact that what he thought then, and he hasn't repudiated it, right? He tried to do a little walk back for a second, but he's never said, I was really wrong. I shouldn't have done that. Of course we should prosecute these crimes. He was wrong. Of course we should prosecute those crimes, and we need a prosecutor who will prosecute them. So if any one of your folks listening out there, if they want to know more about me, they can go to maudmaron.com and check it out.
Yeah, we got about 8,000 people on here so far, almost 9,000. All your links, Maud's website, her social media handles, they're all in wherever you're watching or listening to the stream. So appreciate you guys for joining. No, yeah, listen, it all comes down to common sense, and we've been saying it for even prior to the election. I mean, I was listening to the debates, and it was like 100%. These people were running to be social workers. They all had, everyone that was running for the last Manhattan DA race, all had a no prosecution list. I'm like, I don't know when did this come out that we're not prosecuting? But a lot of it I really think a lot of it comes down to common sense. You're talking about like a lot of the things you're saying. He could have moved away from all of these insane narratives, but he is that spoiled rich kid with these insane non-common sense narratives, and that's kind of why I was leading into the next question with what happened with the schools, because I mean, you said something common sense and you were attacked for it, and it was like you were a horrible person for saying probably what 99.9% of all the parents in New York City would think.
Yeah. So to tell your listeners, I've been elected multiple times to what's called a Community Education Council in New York City. It's a school board in the rest of the country, but we call it an education council here. And I was, I've been on that council. I've proposed, mostly I'm what you would call a pro-merit parent. I think the lowering of academic standards is bad for all public school kids. I have 4 kids. I have a graduate of New York City public schools and 3 that are still in the public school system. I'm a big believer in public schools, but I really do think we want to raise the standards, not lower them. But it involves, I don't want to be flippant about this topic, so I'm going to say it's like a 2-parter why I got kicked off, which is there was a particularly anti-Semitic article in my daughter's high school newspaper. I commented to a New York Post reporter called me up and asked me about it. And I said it was, basically I criticized the anti-Semitism in that piece using harsh words, and it was an anonymous piece. So I didn't know who wrote it. Nobody knew who wrote it. And I said, what exactly did I say? I said, it was disgusting. It referred to October 7th as justified resistance, right? In other words, the men, women, and children that were slaughtered and horribly, horribly killed on October 7th in Israel, that was justified resistance, which is a perfect example of the most heinous form of the champagne socialist, spoiled rich kid, bad ideology that we're talking about. And I said what I thought, which is if you're going to promote Hamas propaganda, like put your name to it. And I said the byline should read coward, not anonymous, because that's what I thought. And that's what I felt. And I'm a free American woman, so I get to say what I think. And Chancellor David Banks was like, oh, no, you don't. You can't say that. And he kicked me off the council. I went into federal court, fought a good First Amendment battle, got a preliminary injunction, and got myself put back on because I know how our Constitution works. But the one extra thing that I will add to this is that every newspaper, the left, there's an education rag in this city called Chalkbeat, which always promotes the most lefty ideology. The New York Times, which has been known to promote some lefty ideologies here and there too. When they covered this story, they mentioned the anti-Semitism stuff, which was the official reason, the story I was commenting on that I got kicked off. But what they all mentioned was gender ideology, because I had passed in my resolution in my education council a resolution. And for those that don't know, unlike the rest of the country, our school boards we don't have any real power. We can't hire and fire superintendents. We don't have, real authority. So we have what's called advisory opinion. So our resolutions are advisory. We're saying like, hey, DOE, you should listen to our good ideas. And one of my non-binding advisory resolutions that I wrote and got passed through my council is that we should revisit and this was before, by the way, Trump got elected. This was in March of 24. And I said, we should revisit the 2019 gender guidelines, which allow biological males to play in female sports when they say they have a female gender identity. It was the worst idea then, and it remains the worst idea now. And it was the softest, most gentle advisory opinion. I wasn't flame throwing. I merely said, like, look, girls have had to fight for a long time for parity in sports. In 1901, when the Public School Athletic League was formed, it was for all boys. In the 70s and 80s and 90s, we had different legal groups fighting to get girls equal time on playing fields, these sort of things. I just outlined the history. And then I said, when these gender guidelines were passed, nobody consulted or brought in female athletes, their coaches, their parents. Like, they're always talking about inclusivity, right? DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Let's have a truly inclusive process, include the female athletes, include the coaches, the parents, and discuss. And of course, include gay kids or kids who say that they're the opposite sex, or include those kids, include everybody, have the conversation about what's fair and what's right. And everyone lost their mind. 17 Democrats officials in this city sent a letter to our council telling us how terrible we were for merely asking for this conversation. They've been harassing me for a year and a half. There are men in dresses, these guys who show up and say that they're women, have been coming to my council for a year and a half, with signs, with noisemakers, with, drama. They stand up and dance the Macarena whenever some lesbian who doesn't want men in lesbian bars and spaces and sports leagues shows up, like crazy stuff. They stand up and they do drama and silliness. And I'm tired of it. It's so tedious, but it's been nonstop. People have the right to protest. I certainly support all these idiots' right to come and do their stupid protesting as long as they're doing it in a lawful way, but it's tedious as hell and I'm tired of it. But what I really find much more distressing is the politicians, because frankly, a lot of them are the ones that are running for office now and are going to get elected. Mark Levine and Brad Hoylman and all these ridiculous people in Manhattan who, and sometimes with someone like Mark Levine, I know so many people who are endorsing him because, as terrible as Mark is, a lot of people think he's better than Justin Brannon. So it's like we've got like a choice, bad choice one or bad choice two. But like
we're pushing to write in Sam Antal, the People's Controller.
I love Sam. Sam is great. But is certainly smarter than the whole lot of them. But I think that on this issue alone, we were saying before, like 80% of people agree with you. This one is the mother of all. Most people actually agree across the country, in the city. People tell me all the time, oh, I agree with you, Maud. There shouldn't be boys and girls sports. And the reason I mention it is because that's the thing that's the one that, like, how, look, let me make this prediction. 5 years ago, when people were running for office, including Alvin, everyone wanted to defund the police. The city council was voting to close Rikers Island, to get rid of the street crimes unit, to do all of these things. Right now, it's the gang database. It's like they want to make law enforcement nearly impossible. And even if law enforcement pulls through and makes the necessary arrest, there'll be nowhere to put people if we go through with this stupid close Rikers plan. But now, if you saw the mayoral debate, everyone's like, oh, no, we can't close Rikers. And I'm not for even Zoran, who used to like get up in bed and yell, defund the police in the morning. Now he's not for defund the police. I promise you that some point in the future, I don't know when it is going to be, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. I hope sooner rather than later, everyone is going to say, oh, of course there shouldn't be boys and girls sports. Of course I'm for girls sports. Yes, let's protect the girls. But like, that day is coming. I've been right about so much, guys. I'm not alone. There's lots of other common sense New Yorkers with me, but like I'm the bellwether for like the common sense Democrat, turned independent, turned Republican, who says like, this is insane. It doesn't make sense. And people, agree with me, and we just have to create this political spaces where people can speak up, because we're going to get there. It's just a lot of young people are going to be hurt in the process, and particularly girls are losing opportunities in the process, and I want that day to come sooner rather than later.
It's amazing. I'm sitting here and I'm enjoying listening to you. It's like, wow, what a breath of fresh air. Common sense. It just sounds common sense to me. I'm a parent. You're a parent. John's a parent. Our friends and listeners, most of them are parents. And you're saying to yourself, hey, we're not saying we're completely against everything that entails in DEI or any type of idea, right? But what you're saying is, let's hold the school accountable by asking questions. Let's have a real conversation. John talks about it. I talk about it. We're both into combat sports, weightlifting, and I'm into combat sports and jiu-jitsu, and I compete myself. And I don't think that that biological men should be in these type of sports. It's just outright dangerous. And I'm glad that you asked these questions. The bottom line is we have to hold them accountable.
It is dangerous, but it's not just sports. There are men in Rose M. Singer prison right now. Like the absurdity, the absolute, complete absurdity of sometimes you have men who are, they commit a crime, they're arrested, they're prosecuted, they're sentenced, and then they discover that they have a female gender identity and they need to be housed in a woman's prison. No woman, and I'm sure you guys know that many of the women who are incarcerated, people who are guilty and have committed a crime and are incarcerated, a lot of those women are victims of domestic violence, sexual abuse in their past, and in their, these are women oftentimes who have had a rough go of it. You're in jail, you're serving your time, but you don't deserve to be housed with a rapist. I mean, what is more Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment than, it used to be the progressive position. The reason we have sex segregated jails is because progressives said, hey, this isn't right to house women in a prison. They're being raped, they're being hurt, they're being assaulted. We sex segregated jails and other places in our society to protect women, right? And even incarcerated women deserve that protection of sex segregation. And now all of a sudden, some 6'5" burly dude who says, I'm a girl, gets to go into that woman's prison. We've had cases across the country of male inmates impregnating female inmates. It's like you weren't feeling that womanly when you got that person pregnant, when you got that woman pregnant, so it's like, I can't, it's hard to take people seriously when they look you in the eye and say, trans women are women. No, they're not. That's the whole point of trans. You're the opposite sex and you want to live as the sex that you're not. So it's like a house of cards, right? Once you're like, I can't pretend that knocking down academic standards will make our public schools better. It won't. They'll make them worse. I cannot pretend that shutting our schools for months on end is fine because kids are resilient. I cannot listen to you scream, my body, my choice, but take that mandate, that untested vaccine, or lose your job or shutter your restaurant or because I said so, right? This No Kings protest. Oh my Lord. I had so many of the women that I campaigned with to open our schools, to make sure that kids could go back to their public school. Kids were the ones longest locked out of their sports, right? Because the private schools, the parochial schools, New Jersey, Long Island, all the kids were going back to their sports, but New York City public schools were locked down the longest and the hardest, with the exception of California, were locked down the longest and the hardest. And it's like the idea that you had to take a vaccine to play basketball. What are you talking about? Like, it's insane. And then we had this No Kings Day protest yesterday because Trump derangement syndrome being what it is, it makes people lose their minds. And it's like, what's more kingly than saying you can't do your job. You can't leave your house. Your kids can't go to school unless you take this vaccine, unless you inject this thing into your body that you don't want to. And by the way, you don't need, because you maybe have natural immunity, which we all knew up until 5 seconds ago was actually the best kind of immunity you could have. That was the most kingly, authoritarian, insane behavior that you could see during COVID. And, Donald Trump, he's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Like he's the guy who he is. He is deeply adored by so many and detested by so many. But regardless of what you think about Donald Trump, he's never done anything like the leadership the in my city did during COVID. And if you want to say you don't want to live with kings, okay, then where the hell were you when I was trying to get our schools open and objecting to mandates? And because I missed you, like you weren't there then.
All the stuff that you say, it just makes sense. Like, it's common sense. And I brought up the analogy of combat sports, and I do think it's dangerous, and there are so many different facets we could talk about where it's dangerous. And even in policing, it's the same thing. A lot of people say, well, women shouldn't be in police work. And I say, well, there's a lot of great roles that women play in policing, but I don't expect people, they're not going to take down a 6'5" man. I don't expect a woman to. I expect her to play her role. There's plenty of men in the police department who can't take down someone 6'5" either. But in any case, it's great. You talk about intrusive police work. You talk about proactive. I refer to it as intrusive police work, right? Under the case of People versus the Board. So in your experience, right, as working on the public side of defending things, do you think that, is there any data showing that this DEI movement has a better relationship as far as are the cops doing a better job? Or is there less aggressive police work? Are there better stops? Is there better arrest under this DEI movement? Is there any data to show that this DEI movement is actually working and making police better? Because that's what we hear. We hear this DEI movement, women are less aggressive and they stop less white men. And this is what we hear. I mean, we've done podcasts where we've shown the data.
Right.
Is there any data showing this actually works?
Look, there's claims everywhere, for why you hire and promote according to race or sex or these, oppressed categories. There are claims everywhere about how it makes it better, but no, there is absolutely no data that I know of that withstands scrutiny. There's all sorts of crap studies out there that have a top line that tell you, believe us. But once you dig into it a little bit, in New York, Chris Rufo at the Manhattan Institute has done a great job of putting together lots of information that shows you the real numbers and the real truth about DEI. And it's not actually unique to claims about why you would want diversity goals in hiring and police work or promotions or anything like that. It's true across the board. It's true in the military, in the corporate world, in the education world. It's like everywhere we've seen that folks have to sort of bend the knee to the diversity, equity, and inclusion edicts and mandates, we don't see a rise in profitability, in safety, in performance. It just we have to get back to good old fashioned merit. The people, and look, let's face it, there was a time way back when being a white man made you more likely to be up for a promotion than being a minority or being a woman. But it's like, there's no point in fighting the battles of yesterday. We've jumped that shark completely. At this point, there is actually, I think more white men have lost out on promotions and advancements that they should have gotten based on their skill and ability in the last generation plus of American life. Than not, then the opposite way, right? It's not that good old boys network, they just got a bit. I'm not saying that didn't exist in the past, or you might find pockets of it here or there, but now it's the more you can, if you're I'm the, one-armed Black lesbian with neurodivergent ADHD, and they're like, oh, great, come our way, right? It's you have to promote people based on skill and ability, and in certain organizations, right? If you're going to run your corporate entity that makes and sells furniture into the ground by promoting bad people, like that's on you. Stupid choice, but whatever, you're going to do it. But in public sector areas like safety, in the military, in federal aviation, in all sorts of areas that we all as regular everyday people depend on, it's inexcusable to indulge it at this point because we know it doesn't make our organizations run better or stronger. We need people who are the best at what they do to get promoted, period, full stop. That's not complicated. It's not hard. And at the end of the day, 99% of people agree with us on that.
Well, but when they're removing competency and merit out of schools, I mean, obviously the next step is to do it, at work and corporations and agencies. So completely insane. All right. So Bragg now. Let's get on Bragg because he's been a little, he's been on the news. He's had some high profile things that I think the entire country watched happen. 3 of them, and take your time with them, but like one, the going after Donald Trump. I don't think anyone thought that was the job of the Manhattan DA, but he did. And everyone else he ran against thought he did, as well as we saw the prosecution of Jose Alba, the bodega owner who was attacked and defended himself. He was arrested. He went after him. He later, after so much national pushback, he dropped charges on him. And then the failed prosecution of Daniel Penny. What do you think about all 3 of those, and what would your administration do differently, if any?
Those are like 3 great reasons in and of themselves not to vote for Alvin Bragg to run him out of town, right? And I think I really would have made the opposite decision on all those cases. I mean, I think the Daniel Penny case, that you can have I don't think that case really should have been prosecuted, but I think there are reasonable people who had concerns about it. I think the way they prosecuted that case was outrageous. But let's just go through them. The Donald Trump case. It's the same thing where the left is talking about protecting democracy and talking about democracy, and where my former party is acting like, democracy is on the line because of Donald Trump. There's nothing more undemocratic, nothing more third world banana republic than going after the leading candidate, the presidential candidate of the other party, on some nonsense made up charge. You really had to stretch. This was like writing a check to a woman that you maybe or maybe not had some extramarital affair with. It can be unseemly. It certainly doesn't make it illegal. And trying to stretch it into a finance campaign violation by doing a bump up from this misdemeanor to this felony, you really had to stretch the law in all sorts of weird and contorted ways. My prediction is that case will be tossed on appeal. I think there are multiple reasons why it doesn't withstand appellate scrutiny. But it really tells us about Bragg. He's a partisan hack, and he is more than willing to use his office, the Manhattan District Attorney's office, to be an arm of the Democratic Party. And it doesn't matter if it had been the opposite way, right? If it's like going after a Republican, going after a Democrat, it's just wrong. You shouldn't do it. It debases the office, and it is bad for democracy. The Jose Alba case was clear as a bell. I mean, both the Jose Alba case and the Daniel Penny case were, cases of someone defending themselves and defending others, right? And in New York state law, you have the right to use commensurate force to defend yourself or defend others. And Jose Alba, this is an old guy who clearly would have gone through his whole workday and the rest of his life standing there behind the counter selling things without getting in any kind of violent confrontation with anybody, if a man younger than him, stronger than him, more aggressive, violent, hadn't gone behind the counter and started wailing on him for no reason, right? This is the kind of criminality we see unleashed when it's like this guy had been called down, I think, by his girlfriend who was having a fight over chips or something, with some paying for potato chips or something. I forget the exact details, but outrage. That, not that there's any reason to go behind the counter and start beating up an old guy, but this was particularly outrageous. The fact that Bragg could look at that tape and think, I know, I'm going to prosecute this guy is beyond incredible. The Daniel Penny case, I've had the pleasure of meeting Daniel Penny. I know Thomas Kniff, his lawyer in that case, who previously ran against Alvin Bragg, who was an absolutely outstandingly good candidate, running at a time where it was really hard. We were in peak woke back then, right? I understand why people look at Jordan Neely, the man who died in that confrontation, and feel a lot of empathy for him. I represented a lot of guys like Jordan Neely, but Jordan Neely's death is also on Alvin Bragg, because Jordan Neely had been in and out of that criminal justice system. We as taxpayers were funding the left's answer to Jordan Neely. He had gotten supportive housing, quote unquote supportive housing. When you are psychotic and drug addicted and can't make good decisions, we could have given him a penthouse anywhere. He couldn't take it. There was a reason he was on the street using street drugs, because he didn't have the ability to get off drugs, to get the medications he needed, and he didn't have the support system from family, from friends, from anyone to help him make good decisions. So he was spiraling out of control. That's where the criminal justice system can be a force for good, and where the prosecutor's office can say, we're going to prosecute you for this case, but we're going to acknowledge and understand that you're mentally ill, and we're going to offer you incarceratory plea bargains that would take you off the street, but also try to help you get off drugs and deal with your mental illness. Instead, what Alvin Bragg did is that pie in the sky, like, here's some supportive housing, here's a social worker, call this number and go make an appointment. That doesn't work for the street mentally ill, right? Cops know that, who are out on the street patrolling every day. Legal aid lawyers know it. Prosecutors used to know it 5 minutes ago. It doesn't work for that street mentally ill cohort. And so it's terrible to see someone like Jordan Neely there. I can understand a prosecutor maybe thinking that there's some prosecution there. Ultimately, I think particularly the fact that Daniel Penny, if you saw some of the tape when he went in and interviewed, the police, the detective interview with him afterwards, it was so 100% clear from that interview that he really did think that the people on that subway were in danger from Jordan Neely, and that he was trying to prevent violence and prevent people from getting hurt. I just don't think that was the case. It certainly shouldn't have been prosecuted the way that it was. And I also think, if I remember correctly, the ADA in that case really tried to turn it into a race case, which it just clearly wasn't. And I think that's the kind of woke nonsense you have to weed out of the district attorney's office by referring to Daniel Penny as a white man and referring to Jordan Neely as a black man. Sometimes race is part of a case, right? Sometimes there are hate crimes that are race-based, and if it's appropriate, you introduce it into evidence with actual evidence. There was no evidence to support that Daniel Penny targeted someone or hurt somebody on that subway based on the color of their skin, so it shouldn't have been part of the case. But, why let a little thing like evidence get in the way?
Right, evidence, exactly. You know what? I love hearing your take and your perspective, and I think it's an honest perspective when it comes to this. What's interesting about this is you're talking about the what could have been preemptive to help someone that's mentally ill, or someone that actually is living a life of crime. And that's why I find, and I've been talking about this for a long time, I think a lot of the problems with the bail reform. Now, before I even get to that, I can say, I understand, I get it. I don't think someone should sit in jail for 3 years that's innocent until proven guilty, that doesn't have the economic status or the prestige to really combat their case to compare with to someone that is, financially stable. But I think it's gone too far. We've gone too far, because I always say, sometimes if you have someone who is a perpetrator and they're committing maybe several robberies or several burglaries, and they're not actually getting disciplined and they're not getting sentenced in court, well, then they're let back out and they're committing more crimes. By the time they get sentenced, now they're going to spend a longer time in jail. We actually just allowed a perpetrator to ferment into more of a monster. So also, I think what's great is you mentioned Article 35, where people have a right to defend themselves, which we're talking about Jose Alba. And who also has a right to defend themselves? Police officers. And the reason why I mention this, so we had a police officer on this podcast. We supported him very much. We're still friends with him now. His name is Juan Perez. He was a police officer in Greenwich Village in the 6th Precinct. and he was summoned. He was working in uniform on patrol. He was summoned to a 911 call where numerous people had called from that area, also bodegas, that there was a violent perpetrator who was emotionally disturbed. Juan Perez responded. He got attacked, and eventually he was charged and prosecuted by Bragg's office, and he was prosecuted for assault 3, a misdemeanor assault. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's a different standard of justice in Alvin Bragg's office when it comes to your everyday citizens and police officers? Yes, police officers are held to a higher standard. But what are your thoughts on cases like this?
I don't actually know the details of that particular case, but I will say that there has been Bragg's office and Bragg's day one memo and Bragg's commentary in general and all the positions he's taken really feed into this sort of like ivory tower, Ivy League kind of notion that cops are the bad guys, right? That cops are the upholders of systemic racism or privilege or all this gobbledygook nonsense that I am tired of and other people are tired of. I mean, are there bad cops sometimes? Yeah, like there are bad dentists, there are bad hairdressers, there are people that are bad at their jobs. We have plenty, like more than enough mechanisms in place to go after members of the police force, the members of the correctional, staff that don't do their jobs correctly and that do things wrong. But I really think that a prosecutor, there has to be a really close partnership between the prosecutor's office and law enforcement. And I think when you're like, you have to understand that, for me, of course, you're going to have people on our streets, particularly now, because the narrative of anti-cop has been so loud and been out there for so long, people who are challenging the authority of the police. Part of the job of the police is to not have their authority challenged. You have to be the authority when you're out there on the street, because the people that, if a cop comes up and tells me to move over, like to get to the other side of the street, that they're doing something that, like, I'll comply in a nanosecond, right? As will many, many New Yorkers. The people that don't comply, the people that say F you and get in the cop's face are the very people that the cop needs to be able to like exert their authority and assert their authority and make sure that that person listens to them. And sometimes that's going to be physical. And I think absolutely a police officer needs to have the ability to arrest people for noncompliance, right? You have to be able, because what's the point of having cops in uniform out there if you can just tell the cop, like, go to hell, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And I think the what some people call the diaphragm law, it's like, here, we want you to do your job. What we say to police officers is be there at a moment's notice. Like when we call 911, we want you to be there as fast as possible. When we're afraid of being robbed, being hurt, we want you to be there as fast as possible. And we want you to detain, stop, arrest the bad guy. But we want you to do it in this like flawless, gentle, magical way where the person who's being detained never gets a scratch and never gets hurt in any way. And that, like, of course, if you're arresting some teenager who's stealing in, Macy's, and you're a 6'2" cop and you're arresting teenage girls who are stealing, you should probably be able to do that arrest pretty, not without much physical confrontation. But when you're on the street and you're arresting somebody who's drug addicted, who's mentally ill, who's like there's going to be scuffles. And by scuffles, I mean, sometimes people are going to get hurt. And police officers as employees have every right to protect themselves, to not want to get bit, to not want to get punched, to not want to get hurt. That's sometimes a violent process. And I just think that that people have, body cameras, I think for the most part have been a positive, not always maybe necessarily, but for the most part have been awfully positive for police officers, because you see an endless number of officers behaving reasonably with people being nasty and violent and rude. But I think what's hard for people to understand, even with body cameras, is that sometimes those confrontations are just intensely physical, right? And police, and it's like the idea, I realize my father's a doctor. He's retired now from, he was an orthopedic surgeon. And I remember like realizing at a certain point how stressful it must be to be a doctor, because when doctors get sued for malpractice, it's like, oh, wait a second, you have to do your job perfectly every single time or someone's going to sue you. Like that seems like a stressful profession to me, because in every other profession in the world, everybody else can make a mistake, mess up. You're a painter, you don't like the canvas, you toss it, you start again. You're a baker, you make a bad cake, a chef, whatever, like you're a landscaper, that you did the yard, it looks like crap, you plant some more trees, like whatever it is. But when you're the cop or the surgeon or these people that are like never, ever allowed to make a mistake, you have this situation where, and I think Bragg's knee-jerk reaction to charge a cop with assault 3 when they're effective, making an arrest that is a necessary arrest, that's an arrest justified by probable cause, it's an appropriate arrest. I think it really is a betrayal of the process. Now, if a cop goes out and beats somebody up for no reason, that cop should be arrested, of course. But like, if you're effectuating a valid, supported by probable cause arrest, I think a prosecutor's office has to really work with the police officer to understand that, that they're doing a job that is really hard to do perfectly 100% of the time. And I just think you have to take in all the fact, like, should this arrest have been made? Was this person fighting? I don't know the facts of that case, but you have to ask all of those questions and come out on the side of trying to understand, was the cop trying to do their job? And if so, I don't think that cop should be prosecuted. That was a really long answer. Sorry, Eric, but
no,
it's
that was a great answer. That was a great answer. And a lot of people in the chat are saying it now, that you understand it, you get it. And I think that's the thing that we see a lot of times with people running for office is they just don't get it. Like, so like, and it's, and it was an amazing response. So I'm glad you spelled it out. You had recently co-authored an article in the New York Post with City Council Minority Leader Joanne Ariola. In there, you guys highlighted that in 2023, 62% of all the cases brought before that were brought before Alvin Bragg office were dismissed.
Yeah.
51% of misdemeanor cases. 51% of misdemeanor cases used to be tried by Bragg's office until he took over, right. And that went down to 29%. And for felonies, it was a 68% trial rate went down to 51%. Right. You guys quoted Raphael Manguel in there, the Manhattan Institute, when he stated that we have lowered the transactional cost of crime. What do you see the major problem? What this lack of the DA actually doing their job, and like you said, like pretending to be a social worker and not a prosecutor?
Yeah. Well, first of all, shout out to Joanne and Raphael. They're both great in their respective roles in the city, to constantly putting forth a lot of common sense positions. Excuse me. Yeah, look, one of the things that's most frustrating right now about public safety problems in our city is it's not like there's a big mystery. It's not like, oh my God, how can we possibly make our city safer? Right? There's no big mystery here. We know how to make our city safer because we've done it before. We have the same police force, the NYPD, who brought crime down to historic low levels just recently, right? We have the ability to say, we're going to police quality of life crimes, and we're going to arrest and prosecute the people who are doing them. Now, I'm not a big Bragg defender, but I will say one thing. The discovery laws in Albany do make it harder for the ADAs to prosecute their cases. Could we do a lot more with the laws currently on the books? Absolutely, 100%. Like, it's not an excuse, right? There's plenty of things we could do right now. But I agree with Police Commissioner Tisch that we need to change things in Albany in order to really get back to where we need to be in terms of prosecution and in terms of safety, in terms of restoring public safety where it can and should be. But there's plenty of things we could do right now. And one of the things you need to do is stop reducing cases that can and should be tried as felonies to misdemeanors, stop dismissing misdemeanors, stop his do not prosecute list, all of that stuff. But we need to do two things: prosecute more cases, especially the recidivists. We know, we meaning the city, the cops, the DA's office, know there's a certain number of people who commit the same crimes again and again and again, whether it's drug dealing in Washington Square Park down here near where I live, or whether it's, the people boosting pharmacy after pharmacy after pharmacy in other neighborhoods. We know who those criminals are. Not every crime. There's no Minority Report here. You can't look into the future. But like, the recidivist rate in this city is so staggering. There's a certain number of people who are driving that petty larceny number up. And if we arrest those people and prosecute those people, and we used to, when I was practicing in those courts, if you get a trespass notice and tells you don't go back into the store because they know the person's going to steal that store, you can bump it up to a felony. You should do that. They should do that all the time, because it drives down the number of people who will be in there stealing, which raises all of our quality of life. So I just think that like Raphael could not be more right about transactional costs. It's this thing that like, if you're a criminal in this city, who would you want to be in the district attorney's office? Alvin Bragg, because Alvin Bragg will make it so that you get a second, third, fourth, fifth, and seventh chance to just keep going out and doing your crimes without ever paying a real price. He's every criminal's best friend.
You're absolutely right? It's almost like when we talk about the memorandum, the day one memo, Alvin Bragg put out basically like, hey, it's almost like a sign. If you're a criminal, go commit these crimes, because I'm not going to prosecute. You're not getting a felony, right? You're getting a misdemeanor. I mean, it's just insane, right? So we used to see it much more often. We see it less now, but press conferences with the DA's office and the police department, right? They were supposed to work together, right? It's supposed to be interdependent with one another. So if you are elected, and God willing, you got some great comments here, by the way. There's a lot of support from our friends and listeners. Someone even said, I think it's Neil. He says, if I could get it, says, I wish he was running for DA's office in Brooklyn. So you got a lot of support over here. Well, you're making sense, right? It makes sense. So if you are elected, God willing, how would you work with the police department? What would your relationship be, and how would that? What would that look like?
Really kind of the opposite of Alvin Bragg. I mean, you have to work with the NYPD, and you have to understand. I keep singing her praises because I'm really impressed with Police Commissioner Tisch, but I love the way she handled the No Kings protest, right? She said what I feel, which is fully support everybody's right to go out and protest. It's a basic American right. It's really important to support and protect. But if you come after law enforcement, if you break the law, if you do anything unlawful, you will be arrested. We will make sure that we protect peaceful protest while arresting all the lawbreakers. That's what you need to do. And it creates a city that we all deserve and want to live in, right? I'm a mom of 4 kids. My kids take the subway to go to school. Like, moms everywhere need to know that their kids can get hundreds of thousands of kids in our city every day. I think people who live outside of New York City don't understand, like, if anyone's listening from the other part of the country, how vast and big the numbers are. Hundreds of thousands of kids take that subway to school every day. It is the little yellow school bus for kids in New York City. It's inexcusable that people are getting set on fire, pushed in front of the train tracks, that people are dirty and filthy in the city. And what Alvin Bragg is doing is saying, what's the problem? I don't see any problem. That's the result of his policies, right? It ushers in that kind of lawlessness. And I got to say, just because people are out voting for the mayor right now, Zoran Mandami would make Bragg look good. Like, he's got even worse ideas. That horrible, terrible, no good, very bad socialist, spoiled little brat. Just rank anybody but him. I'm no longer a Democrat, so it's not my choice.
Oh, hey, really?
Yeah.
So you like Zoran? Oh, God.
Yeah.
John's going to vote for him.
It's hysterical.
Honestly, I say rank Paperboy Prince #1, and that's it. Like, to me, they're all the same clowns. I don't really see much of a difference. Zoran actually stole all of Eric Adams' 2020 campaign ideas. So it's like it's like everyone's like, oh, this is crazy. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. You guys voted for it in 2020.
Well, look, not to be too inside baseball, but you know who would be the happiest in the world if Zoran wins the primary?
Eric Adams.
Curtis.
Well, I mean, I disagree with that. I think Curtis needs Cuomo to win that primary. I think he needs a five-way race. I don't think Cuomo's running as an independent, and I think they're gonna. You see Eric Adams on Fox News every day, on Tucker Carlson. He's the Trump-back candidate, and a lot of people are buying into Eric Adams saved New York City during COVID and saved us from crime, and it's just a totally different story about the actual reality of what actually transpired. So
you mean Zoran on the working families line, Cuomo on the Democrat, the whole thing. Yeah, that it'll certainly keep selling the papers and the podcast.
It's an interesting story, but I think I say, in my opinion, I think he needs a five-way race. I think if he has a four-way race, I think Eric Adams is now the Norwegian rat, like Eric always says, and he's going to survive, and it makes him the number one candidate in the race, in my opinion, because it's the Cuomo's not going to run because the line's going to be he can't beat Mondani. We need to save New York City from socialism. And honestly, I've seen a lot of Republicans. And the reason why I'm on the outs with the Republican Party, even though I am a registered Republican, is because I see them helping Zoran Mondani. And I'm like, oh, you don't like socialism, but you're secretly helping him in the background. It's weird. So weird stuff going on in the election. But so it's an interesting time. But Curtis Sliwa, common sense. And unfortunately, I see a lot of things, a lot of similarities with both of you. You guys are saying all the right things. You guys have done all the right things. And I don't see you guys in the media. And I'm like, I see you sometimes, Ma, but I don't see the push behind you that I believe should be there. Because honestly, I believe you should be on the national stage and you should be on the national media, and your campaign should be backed by the national GOP as well as the entire New York City GOP. And I know that you do get some love, but in my opinion, it's not enough. And
thank you. And I think I might be meeting Michael Watley later this week, so I'll tell him you said so. The RNC chair.
Absolutely. I'll tell him myself.
I'll take all the love I can get, national, state, local. But I have a really important question for you, John. What is a Norwegian rat?
I don't know. It's just something that Eric uses. He just says it survives.
I say it all the time. The rats that you see in New York City, they're actually called Norwegian rats. And I say they could survive anything. So I always say Eric Adams, he's a Norwegian rat. He could survive anything. And you're right, though. You said it before. If he's reelected, it's good for the podcast. So 4 more years, Eric Adams.
He's a content machine.
He really is. We're actually gonna have to thank him.
Well, that's hysterical. I never heard that about the rats before. And my grandmother was a very proud Norwegian American. But she's no longer with us. But I don't think she would like to know that the rats of New York were called
Norwegian rats. Yeah. I don't know why they call it. I gotta look it up. I don't know why they call it a Norwegian rat, but that's what it's referred to.
I've only ever heard you say it. I've never heard anyone else.
I know. Listen, I worked in housing for many years. I worked in the Lower East Side, and I worked in PSA 7. And the parking lot. I mean, it's a shame of the NYPD, but the parking lot in the back of Police Service Area 7, the Bronx. I mean, sometimes it's like a circus act to get to the door because it's just rats running between your legs. But I'll never forget. There's this one building in the Lower East Side called 154 Broom Street. And it was almost like okay, can we make it? And there was 911 calls constantly because the courtyard, there was so many rats running back and forth. They would just run right to your legs. It just became normal. And that's so I started looking up and I saw they were Norwegian rats.
Even knowing they're Norwegian rats, I'm still not a fan of the rats.
So Maud, you brought up what's it called? You brought up discovery reform, and actually it's a big issue. It is a big issue, but what we see from Bragg and a lot of other DAs, all the other 5 borough DAs, is they use it as an easy way to get rid of cases. Now, you just brought up the protests, and while I agree with what Tish says, what actually the reality of it is much different, because what happens is when these protests turn illegal, when we identify these agitators inside of the protests and they take over the streets, or they damage property, or they assault people, or they go after cops, there's one the NYPD is notorious for undercharging, and that's not something you could fix as the DA.
Right.
That's a political issue between the police commissioner and the mayor, but they're notorious for undercharging and never appropriately charging people that assault police officers. Notorious for that. So, we could play the whole crime is down game. But once it gets to the DA's office, I mean, almost 99% of the times with all of these cases related to protests turning illegal, they're like, we can't do anything. Discovery reform, we can't get these cases up. And they drop all the charges. And then that leads to, all right, I'm going to go file a complaint against the cops now because the DA didn't prosecute me. I'm going to file an IAB, a CCRB complaint. And then I'm going to drop a lawsuit, and New York City Corporation Counsel is going to say, well, DA didn't prosecute. How much could we make you happy with?
We settle this for him.
And what would your administration do differently as it relates to paid agitators being arrested in New York City?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point about the additional costs that I don't think people don't realize about the undercharging and under prosecuting, that we as New Yorkers pay for it on multiple levels. We pay for it because that person's back out on the street committing crime, but we pay for it in some of these settlements of people that are getting settlements for police, quote unquote, abuse, when really it's police doing their job and the prosecutor not, following up and prosecuting those arrests. But I also think it just brings to mind, like when I started working at Legal Aid years and years ago, it was sort of a truism in the courts that with the judges on the bench, the ones that were former prosecutors were sometimes better for us at the defense bar because they sort of they had been the tough on crime guys. They had locked people up. So they felt like they didn't need to prove how tough they were on the bench. Legal aid lawyers that became judges were sometimes the worst for the defense bar, right? Because they were they had been defense lawyers. Now they had to prove that they were tough on crime. And sometimes you're like, oh God, I got this judge. I know they're going to be really hard for whatever reason, whatever the psychology is you want to do in the reasoning. And it's I think that there's something going on with Alvin Bragg where those sort of weird roles are reversed right now. He was a prosecutor, so he wants to show how compassionate he is, how down he is with the social justice movements. He wants to, if you read, I was reading through some of his press releases, he never refers to criminals as criminals. He refers to people as those in need or those, the people, individuals accused of crime. And it's all very tender and loving and thoughtful. You never want to offend, a gangbanger by calling him a mean name. You have to refer to him as a person in need. And I guess I kind of feel coming from the defense bar, I don't need to prove the fact that there are good people who are accused of crimes. Sometimes there's even innocent people accused of crimes. And certainly there are people who are overcharged. Sometimes, the person is charged with, the very last case I tried was a grand larceny that my defense was, it's a petit larceny, not a grand larceny. It was a pretty underwhelming case, but I won that case hysterically because that was my sale case. It was so funny. There was a guy, it was a Macy's case, a grand larceny case where the guy was on camera going from rack to rack to rack, taking clothes off and shoving them in a bag. He was stealing from Macy's. So he was guilty of that crime, but they charged it as a grand larceny. And I said it was a petit larceny, not a grand larceny, which made a big difference. Obviously a felony versus the misdemeanor for someone if they're going to do state time or not. This was a person who had never done state time. So the defense, it was such a stupid case. It was a waste of taxpayer money, but they wouldn't offer him the misdemeanor. I pointed out that every single rack that he stole clothes from had a big sale sign on it that said 70% off. And if you were stealing something, it wasn't worth what was on the stupid price tag. It was worth what it would have been sold for. So it was less than $1,000. We had to impanel a jury to do that, if you can believe it or not. But it's I don't feel the need to prove that I'm a compassionate human being, that I understand that sometimes that someone like a Jordan Neely can be really scary and menacing and dangerous to people on the subway. And at the same time, you can feel compassion for that individual. But the way that you demonstrate that compassion is not by refusing to prosecute him and pushing him back out onto the street where he hurts other people. The way that you demonstrate compassion is by saying, I'm going to prosecute this case because he fractured someone's skull, which he had done in a previous, interaction. And I am going to offer that person whatever resources we have available to deal with their drug addiction, to deal with their mental health issue. But you have to offer what is available within the criminal justice system. And it's not perfect. It's not a perfect system. It's not, if you had a loved one who was seriously mentally ill, you wouldn't think, oh, I hope he gets in the criminal justice system to take care of his mental illness, because it's a rough and tough place to get the kind of treatment you need. But if someone's out committing crime, like, that's the only resource you have available to certain people, and you should use it. So I just feel that, like, it's not, I don't understand why someone I don't understand the progressive prosecution mindset. If you want to be a social worker, be a social worker. If you want to spend your days advocating on behalf of people, I did that for years as a defense lawyer. It's a good job. Go do it, Alvin Bragg. But if you want to be the prosecutor for the borough of Manhattan, if you want to be the person who's making sure that the victims of justice get justice, that people get the justice that they deserve and need, then you have to prosecute the people doing the crimes. It's not complicated. It's not hard. And I don't understand why Alvin Bragg is confused by the job title. He shouldn't be.
I really appreciate you talking, but I'm really confused. Are you saying that when people commit crimes, we should arrest them and prosecute them? Is that what you're saying? It's starting to make sense. I don't know.
25 Manhattan, it sounds crazy, but why not? Let's give it a try. I think it might help make our streets safer.
You got a lot of friends and listeners here already. Leo Ferpini says, and this is crazy, right? This is what New York is at. And it's said. He's right. He says, Maud is an intelligent person with common sense who knows what she's talking about. This means she can never be elected in New York City. I mean, it's sad, but, listen, they're trying to be negative. It's sad, but that's what it's come down to. Like, she makes sense. She can't fit the bill. So you spoke earlier about the diaphragm law. It's near and dear to us. John and I both had our boots to the ground. It's quite interesting, right? So 2020 meets its inception at the height of George Floyd. In 2021, there's pushback where the judge says the language is vague. But then in 2022, the appellate court says the language is clear and totally just legally enforceable.
Right.
So with that being said, having these progressive DAs, John and I argue that every time police officers are in a tussle, they're violating that diaphragm law. We don't want to see any police officers go to jail for that. But at this point, thank God, we only see one case so far go forward. Why, and I don't want him to do it, but why doesn't Alvin Bragg or other DA's office actually pursue that law? It's on the books. They push so hard for it. And then thank God they don't. But why don't they?
Right. I don't know. I guess it would fall into one of two things. One is kind of laziness and like not wanting to bring those cases and do those cases. And the other, which would give them more credit for being smarter, is that what wasn't able to happen in the courts in the absence of a case might happen in the courts with a case, meaning that you'd have to bring in expert testimony and you'd start showing that, like you said, basically all arrests that involve any kind of physical restraint are violating that law, and that it's an impossible law to actually uphold because, the officer who's being prosecuted for it would have to say, this is the way I've made arrests for the last 10 years, as had everybody else in that precinct and other precincts. And it doesn't hold up under scrutiny because, of course, you guys are both right. Like, you can't, you don't arrest somebody by like blowing on them if they're resisting. You have to be able to restrain. And it makes no sense. I don't know if it's Machiavellian and smart that they don't do it and then it hangs out over cops' heads, or if it's just that they don't want the fight. They're too lazy. They don't want to take on the political fight, the litigation fight. I don't know. It's a bad law. We shouldn't have it. And we don't have a chance of changing it until we change who we vote for. Let me tell you something, if I may. This is a tough case, a tough political race to raise money on because so many people think it's really hard. And so anyone who wants to donate, you can donate. Any amount helps. This is not a race that has matching funds, but we have this crazy high limit. So if you're a billionaire out there listening, you can send me $50,000 and we will use it to get the word out and make sure everybody knows this race is happening. But if you got $25 lying around, I take that too, because it all helps. Every little bit, adds up. But I think it's just incredibly important to fight on the local level, even in places where people think you can't win. Alvin Bragg is in office with 211,000 votes. That's how many votes he got in the general election when he ran against Thomas Kniff. Now, nobody knows what the win number is until after election day, what the number is you had to get to beat the opponent. But it's pretty reasonable to assume it's going to be less than the 211,000 votes that Bragg got last time, because I don't think more people are rushing out to vote for Alvin Bragg now because we see what a bad job he's done. So fewer people will probably vote for him, which means the number of people that I need to get to vote for me is less than that. Are you telling me there's not 150,000 voters in Manhattan, Republicans, independents, Democrats, people who, of course, we can rustle up that many votes, but it takes money to target people. That we need to reach out to the Chinese community in their language, to the Dominican community in their language. We need to reach Jewish voters in their synagogues and in their civic associations. We need to reach people where they are. That takes money, and it takes staff, and it takes teams, and you have to get out there and do it. But I know there are that many voters. I know there are enough voters to beat Bragg. It's just a matter of whether or not we can build the kind of campaign with the national earned media that you're talking about to get out there and do it. And I think it's really important to bring the fight everywhere. It's what I did as a school board member. People were terrified when I ran for school board in 2019 for the first time of saying, meritocracy is good. We shouldn't lower the standards, because it got you called racist, got me called racist, got me called a white supremacist, got me, kicked out of my job. But I was right. I was right then, and I'm right now. My public school kids need higher standards, not lower standards. I was right when I said defund the police is a stupid idea. It will make our city less safe. The writings on the wall every time you walk down the street in our city. And I think we have to bring the fight to the places where the worst ideas have the most purchase, right? Because that's what we see in places like Manhattan. These bad ideas govern our day-to-day life, and I'm tired of it. And so are plenty of other New Yorkers. So if we invest in these races, we can win these races.
No, I totally agree with you. I don't buy into the apathetic, New York City's lost, it's never coming back. It's like nobody votes. You have to get people out there to vote. And the problem is most people are paying attention to national politics, and they're paying attention to their local media, whatever it is, CNN, Newsmax, Fox. And honestly, I always say the most liberal stations I ever watch are Fox News and Newsmax, because they do nothing but promote for the Alvin Braggs and the AOCs of the world. They tell their story daily, hourly. Every 20 minutes, I see their face on TV, but I never see more Maron's face on there. And it bothers me. It really does, because I'm like, here we have this candidate that is clearly rooted in common sense, is a true moderate, and understands the issues that the public's facing, understands the issues of the people on the ground, understands the issues of the police. And it's like this holistic approach to public safety and everything that's going wrong. And yet we'd rather just continue to watch these awful prosecutions or awful non-prosecutions and not ever tell anybody that, hey, we have a candidate out here that is running against this insanity, that is the cure for what's been plaguing Manhattan. And no one's batting an eye on it. And it bothers me. It bothers me a lot. And that's why, for those of you asking, there's a lot of people asking, go to Maud's, go to her website. Like I said, it's in the links below. If you're on YouTube, if you're on Rumble, if you're on LinkedIn, go to her website. You can contact her office there if you want to volunteer. Links to donate to her campaign are there. Follow her on social media. And I implore all of you to help her get her message out on social media by resharing. I mean, you see what me and Eric experience on this podcast is like the amount of shadow banning that happens from common sense points of views or point of views that differ from what's out there. I mean, and Mods could tell you about that in 2020 when she's talking about all of these points that 99% of us agree on. But if we put it out there on social media, no one sees that post because, right. No. We don't want anyone in the world to think that any of these common sense ideas. So help her on social media campaign, help her get out. Is there anything that we missed here? Anything you want to highlight about your campaign that we didn't ask? Anything that you think is very relevant that the people in New York City, particularly the people in Manhattan, need to know?
John, we covered so much. I don't know. I don't know that we missed too many things. I will want to say, not to be overly hopeful, but I think once we get past or unjustifiably hopeful, once we get past the mayoral primaries, I do think that this race, my race against Alvin Bragg, will get some more media attention. At least I'm going to be working hard to make that happen, because Alvin Bragg is he is the poster child for progressive prosecution policies that don't work and that are failing our big cities. And it is, it's a local race, it's Manhattan, but it's also a national race, because are we going to really let New York City, one of our, major cities in this country, double down on this totally failed policy of deciding that we're going to protect criminals over everyday citizens? And I think the answer has to be no. And definitely maudmaron.com is my website. You can go there, donate, volunteer, find out more, the whole thing. And we're going to be building right after, we're going to have some announcements right after the mayoral primary. And really, it's a sprint from the end of that primary process to the general election in November. And we're going to be everywhere.
I think you're right. I think we definitely explore a lot of topics, and we don't want to leave any stone unturned. But you're making a lot of sense, and I think it's great. I think a lot of times in New York City we talk about crime, right? Just robberies and burglaries, and just crime that's violent and prevalent, and predicate felons throughout the city. But what we notice a lot is the quality of life, right? And I know you've been supporting Jessica Tisch in many ways, and they have now it's called the Q teams, which we talk about with old is new, and it's really it was conditioned. Yes, well, it's addressing quality of life, right? I think quality of life is a big concern right now in New York City. You mentioned it earlier, low-level offenses, shoplifting, different low-level offenses that are going on in New York City. So if you are elected, right, and I think it's important we address quality of life just as much as these crimes, because it's really affecting life in the subways, just life in general, the appearance of New York City, and it really affects people how they feel. So if you are elected, what factors will lead you to decide if you're going to prosecute or decline to prosecute when it comes to low-level offenses like jumping the turnstile, shoplifting?
I'll give you two examples of things that I hear a lot from New Yorkers that that we haven't talked about yet. One is the illegal cannabis shops, and the other are motorized bikes on the bike path, the bike lanes, and sometimes the sidewalks. Both of those things drive down the quality of life in neighborhoods enormously. And I, for one, am not a big fan of these cannabis shops or of marijuana legalization in general, particularly because, and I say this as a mom, it's just so bad for kids. These goddamn vape pens that are everywhere, and they're sold, they're colorful and they're bright, and they're really targeted to young people. And we went through that with the tobacco industry, 2 generations ago. These cannabis stores are terrible because they sell to really young kids. And I think that you should use every law available. I mean, we've got this weird thing coming out of Albany where they have an advertising budget to push marijuana as if you're doing something patriotic and good when you go out and, buy a blunt. And it's like, it's not a positive thing. It's negative. It's bad. I mean, alcohol is bad for you too. And I have my glass of wine or, cocktail, but it's like, we have a system in place where if you're 15 years old, it's hard to buy alcohol. And that's good because we don't want 15-year-olds drinking. We used to have a situation in place where if you're 15 years old, it's harder to buy drugs. And now we're making it not only easier to buy drugs, but we're advertising that it's a good thing to go out and smoke marijuana. It's not. It's super bad for young people's brains, for their bodies. It's terrible. And I think it's yet again part of that 2-step, which is we need changes in Albany. We have to stop getting drug pushers in Albany trying to say that, marijuana stores are the best thing ever. But we can also just prosecute the laws that are on the books now. And I think we should go back to, making sure that there are penalties to be paid when you're selling to underage kids that you should not be selling to. And I, for one, can't stand seeing what is a motorcycle pretending to be a bicycle whizzing down the street when you see like old people trying to cross the street now, and it's hard for them. And you don't even have to be old to be like freaked out by bikes whizzing down past you on the street. So those are also, Eric, those are quality of life things that drive down. My taxes have gone up since I moved into my apartment, and my quality of life has gone down. That's the exact opposite direction that things should be going. And having a prosecutor who prosecutes quality of life crimes and who adds her voice to the changes that we need in Albany is part of the solution to making things better.
Absolutely. Let's get back to a victim-centric approach to public safety. That's what I'm hearing from you. So I appreciate it, Maud. I appreciate you spending an hour and a half of your day. We know you're busy. Could you leave us with your final thoughts to our friends and our listeners, and just why should Manhattan vote for Maud Maron?
Absolutely. Look, the fact of the matter is, you both have said it at some point or another during this past hour and a half. I'm a moderate, common sense New Yorker, and the positions that I'm putting forth are positions that, frankly, almost all of us agree with. And in order to win this election, I'm going to need people of both major parties, independents, people, to vote maybe in ways that they never voted before, to come together to vote. But what we'll all be voting for are the common sense solutions that we know we need and want in our city. We have to go back to a place where we arrest people for breaking the law, we prosecute them, and that our goal is to make our city and our streets and our subways safer for everybody. I know how to do this job. I'd be good at doing it because I'm not confused about what the role is. And, it would be a deep honor to serve the people of Manhattan and to be the next Manhattan district attorney. My website's maudmaron.com. Everything we talked about here and then some is on there, and you can find out more information, and I'd love to hear from you.
Outstanding. Listen, it's been nothing but a pleasure to have you, Maud Maron. Thank you so much. Actually, it was pretty funny. Before we went live, she actually helped us pronounce her name properly. She said Maron rhymes with Karen.
I keep saying it wrong, too. I keep saying it wrong.
You're trying to make me sound
She's definitely not a Karen.
I'm sorry. I'm in trouble after this podcast.
But she's definitely not a
pleasure to talk to you guys.
Listen, almost an hour and a half. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. But before you go, and then you go on your way, just have a little fun. We always like to ask if you can tell us a little bit about yourself outside this political theater. What do you like to do? I know you're a mom. What kind of things you like to do? Any movies, music, and and enjoy your day, of course.
Oh my, well, that's pretty broad. But summer's coming up and I'm going to be heading to the beach, and I'm never happier than when I'm at the beach with my kids. I'm one of those moms who likes to jump in the ocean with my kids and go for a swim. And I'm looking forward. I don't always get in this early in the summer. I like to wait till that ocean heats up a little bit more, but that's what I'm looking forward to right now, is getting a nice hot summer day and jump in the ocean with my kids.
Yeah, no, it's been a rough June. It's been a rough June. So it's going to be a little cold. You got to wait till about August. But
my kids have already been in Memorial Day. They hit the ocean. They are hardy kids.
Kids don't care. It's amazing watching kids go in cold water. They just they survive. You go in a little bit. I'm tired of it. Listen, Maud Maron, thank you so much for being here on the Finest Unfiltered. You have a lot of support from our friends and listeners. It's outstanding to hear common sense. It's a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much for taking your time out. You're welcome here anytime. Give her a follow. Donate if you can. I think that's great. If it's $25, if you're a billionaire, dip into your pockets.
Your number. Yep. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Outstanding.
Thanks. All right. We'll see you soon. All right.
See you soon. Bye.
All right, everybody. Finest Unfiltered. We'll be back at you. We got Wednesday. Tomorrow, Sal Greco will be on 13:05 or 1:05 p.m. Eastern time. Wednesday, myself and Eric will be back, and then we'll be followed by the Executive Perspective. So, check us out. Find us Unfiltered. We'll be back at you.
There's a handful of retired officers that don't live in the state that have a lot to say about the dream team, as I like to call it. All of a sudden, they retire and have a master plan on how to fight crime. but nothing to contribute when they were here. They want to come back and be part of the dream team. What can I say?
Law enforcement professionals dedicate their lives to serving and protecting our community. But who's protecting their financial futures? That's where Laidlaw Blue comes in. Our wealth management platform is specifically designed for the law enforcement community. Laidlaw Blue is a division within Laidlaw Wealth Management, run by retired New York City detective John McDermott. His status as a retired detective uniquely positions him to establish a deep connection between Laidlaw Blue and the law enforcement community. Our platform is easy to use and provides a range of financial services, including investment management, retirement planning, and insurance solutions. With Laidlaw Blue, you can secure your financial future and provide for your loved ones. Our team of experienced financial advisors understands the unique challenges and opportunities that law enforcement professionals face. We're here to help you navigate the complexities of financial planning and achieve your goals. Laidlaw Blue. Secure your financial future today. Book a meeting using the QR code displayed or call us directly on 888 901 Blue. That's 888 901 Blue.